Hi, welcome to our presentation. This is Group 5, and today we are going to talk a little bit about how a company can redefine failure and encourage calculated risk taking. So for our presentation, we decided to talk about the fall of General Motors back in 2008. Now, the collapse of General Motors into bankruptcy was just another chapter in a long story of mismanagement and decline. Now, many of you may be familiar that a lot of companies hit what seemed like a brick wall back in 2008, and GM was just one of those bigger American icon companies that suffered because of this. So some background on GM and some milestones. In 1908, GM opened its doors to the public and within a few decades became a household name. GM was something that everybody knew who they were, the products that they manufactured, and they were a very well known and well respected name. And GM, they were involved in World War II. They manufactured many of the vehicles that the military used, and they were the first to introduce some very, very popular models back in the early 1900s. And this, again, makes them well known and trusted as an American made company. So, what happened at GM? So, there are many factors that led to GM's downfall. And some of those include how they were unprepared for two recessions. So when the financial crisis hit in 2008, there seemed like there was hardly anything that they could do. They had a few unsuccessful lines of automobiles. They weren't necessarily popular with consumers. Uh, they made emphasis on less fuel efficient models. And as time goes on, people want better efficiency in their vehicles. They want to go farther. And competition from other makes and models also. There are a number of other opinions put forward by people. One is being too slow to innovate because of the size of the company, and this is something that we've talked about in our text, is when a company lacks the innovation to change, a lot of the times they get stuck in sort of a rut. And this may be the reason why GM was unprepared for the financial crisis of 2008. Consumers wanted more fuel efficient models, they wanted safer models, but they were still too hung up on the past, it seemed like. So, how was the failure of GM viewed? So, for a company of that size to fail, why would it continue forward? Why not just put a halt to everything and not risk any more failure? So, a couple of reasons. Investors needed their success, and most importantly, the job market impact would have been 200,000 plus employees just in the United States alone. And there's also some sort of pride and dignity that comes with a big American icon name. And to survive this challenge, big modifications needed to be made. The company needed a bigger, innovative, and adaptive stance as the market changed for financial reasons and for consumer reasons. And the great Henry Ford, who was known for inventing the assembly line, he said, "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently." This is also something that we've talked about in our text in previous chapters, where if something fails, let's start at the beginning, let's try again. And this time, take what we've learned, take the feedback or the telemetry from our consumers and from our data, and let's try it again. The GM had some help. They were reborn through bankruptcy with the help of the U.S. government. There was a financial bailout. We won't go too much in depth with that because also the company needed new management. They needed new people to come in with fresh ideas, and they needed to go greener because we've talked about how consumers, they wanted more fuel efficient vehicles. They needed to discontinue the unpopular models, probably some of the more expensive models they needed to cut back on them, and they needed to change some retired worker benefits as well. So what did we learn from the experience that GM went through? When it's time for change, it's time to change. So when we fail, we need to get back up again. Failure isn't the end unless we don't get back up. So just because GM declared bankruptcy did not necessarily mean that that American icon was dead. They needed to follow trends of other competitors, look at what's successful, and try to incorporate that into your own business. They needed to be proud of their name and not be afraid to change. And this is something that we've talked about in our text many, many times over. If we lack the desire to change, then our success is not going to be as great as it could be. We miss out on a lot of our potential. In conclusion, GM made a comeback because they were willing to change. And one of the key components or factors that we've learned through our DevOps integration is that if companies aren't willing to put forth the full effort towards DevOps principles and skills, they cannot put one foot on the old system and one foot into DevOps integration. They have to fully commit to what they are trying to do. They need to be aware of competition, and they need to survey customers to see what they want so they can beat the competition. This is where the telemetry really comes into play here. GM needed to find out why sales were down and why some unpopular models were unpopular. They needed to be frugal with their resources, but not necessarily cheap. People want more fuel efficient cars, but they do not necessarily want them to fall apart any faster than they normally would. And failure is not the end at all. We always get back up again. As GM is doing relatively well today because they've fixed most of their issues that led to their downfall. And that's it for our presentation. Here is the resource that we used for the majority of this presentation. We hope you all enjoyed it and learned why GM failed and how they turned it